Toby Walsh is a leading researcher in artificial intelligence and was named by the Australian newspaper as a rock star of Australia's digital revolution. He's Laureate Fellow at the University of New South Wales, and I recently caught up with him in Sydney for this interview. Toby Walsh, thanks for joining us on Monnet Conversations.
My pleasure.
In our own time, AI has become all the rage. In lay terms, Toby, what's an intelligence that's artificial?
It's actually a very hard term to describe, and indeed, many of my colleagues will squirm if you ask them to define what artificial intelligence is. But I think, broadly speaking, they would probably agree that it's trying to get computers to do what, when humans do it, we say it requires intelligence. So that's perceiving the world, reasoning about the world, and acting in the world. I think one of the temptations is that people focus on the intelligence. They focus on, we're trying to build intelligent devices, make them smarter and smarter. And they forget there's the other word there, the artificial world. And that's actually, I think that plays quite an important role. It tells us that it's going to be very artificial, very different to human intelligence. And indeed, the limited forms of intelligence we can build today, we can only build machines that do narrow, very limited forms of intelligence. That intelligence has quite a different flavor than human intelligence. It breaks in quite different ways. It's very brittle. It doesn't have human common sense. It doesn't have our emotional intelligence, our social intelligence. It lacks a lot of things. And so that, I think, tricks us into thinking about things. So as an example, we can build really intelligent machines that play chess or Go. And then we think, well, I mean, they're going to be very smart, but they're not. They're idiot savants. They can do just one thing, but one thing very well. Whereas if we met a human who can play Go very well or chess very well, they're probably a very smart person. They can do lots of other things.
So where do you think we are at the current juncture in terms of the AI revolution?
It's very hard to know. We are still a long way away from matching human intelligence. And if we match human intelligence, I think it would be very conceited to think we wouldn't quickly exceed human intelligence. There's nothing particularly special about human intelligence. But how long it's going to take to match human intelligence, it's really hard to know. I did a survey of 300 of my colleagues, other experts in AI around the world, and their answer was actually the title of the last book I wrote, 2062. They thought it was going to take 40 or 50 years. Now, I should caution that there was a huge amount of variability in their answers. There's huge uncertainty. We don't know what we're missing to know what we're trying to be building. There's lots of things that we miss. But equally, and none of them said it was going to take 5 or 10 years. Everyone felt it was still a significant mountain to climb. But none of them were very few of them were saying it was going to take more than 100 or 200 years. It wasn't going to take, it's not going to take 1,000 years. It's not the sort of scale of a scientific problem. It's something that's conceivably going to happen in the next century. Maybe if we're lucky in our own lifetimes. And I think that's an important thing to realize, because at the end of the day, we're the dominant species on the planet, for better or for worse, in many cases for worse, because we're the smartest. Indeed, it's in our name, Homo sapiens. We rather vainly called ourselves that, but that was some truth. We weren't the fastest or the strongest, or we didn't have the sharpest teeth, but we did happen to have the most useful brain. And that has got us to where we've been. And we've faced the possibility that we're going to have machines that are potentially much faster, much smarter than us. There's every reason to suppose that there are lots of human limitations that they won't suffer. They won't. They can be much more rational than us. They can never forget things. They can think certainly much faster than us. They think at electronic speeds. We think at biological speeds. They think in the gigahertz. We think in the hertz. So there's lots of reasons to suppose that they will be smarter than us eventually. But how long? Who knows?
So 2062, I guess, raised a few eyebrows, because one other major estimate, of course, had been Ray Kurzweil's guesstimate. I think it was 2044. And so some people were then sort of saying, well, so 2062, is this just, computer scientists and engineers pushing this out a couple of decades to buy some more time?
There is, once the cynic might suggest that is true, that it's like nuclear fusion, it's always 40 years away. But I think we are. I mean, it's clear we're starting to make significant progress in the sense that there is artificial intelligence turning up in our lives, in our smartphones, in our homes, in our cars. It's starting to play a significant role. We still, of course, we still don't build machines that have many human capabilities and are as adaptable and as robust and as flexible as humans. And it's not clear to us what we have to do to build machines like that. But I would be surprised, I think, as most of my colleagues, if we didn't manage in the next century or so to match human intelligence. I have immense respect for the human brain. I mean, it is still the most complex system in the universe by orders of magnitude. Nothing matches the billions of neurons, the trillions of synapses, connections in our brain. It is an amazing thing. And it does it with just 20 watts of power, which is, again, something that with computers we use thousands of watts of power. So I have huge respect for what we can do with the human brain, but I also expect us eventually to be able to match that.
I will stick with the time frame issue about when non-biological intelligence might equal or outstrip biological intelligence. But just if I could press you on this current phase of development around machine learning, so many claims have been made about where we might be at the moment, particularly some critics argue sort of fairly hyperbolic claims. And often what's given as an instance of the classic arguments about AlphaGo 2 being able to easily now outstrip and the developments with AlphaGo 1, and there's this sort of exponential leaps ahead now in machine learning predictive algorithms. What's your sense of these developments and the sort of stunning level of innovation that is arguably now happening?
The field is racing ahead, and that is driven partly by technology, but also by money. I mean, you look, the amount of money being invested in the field is in the billions. Most nations have got really ambitious programs. The tech companies are investing huge amounts of money. I mean, people don't realize. I mean, if you take conventional multinational companies, they might reinvest 3 or 4% of their turnover in R&D, but the tech companies are investing a quarter of their turnover in R&D.
Right.
We're seeing many of them make individual billion-dollar bets, and that is certainly fueling the advance that we're seeing. But still, and it is worth pointing out that once we can match humans in some narrow task of playing the game of Go, playing the game of chess, translating tweets from Mandarin into English, once we can match humans, it's almost invariably the case that we quickly surpass humans. So that the latest version of AlphaGo now beats the version that beat one of the best human players on Lisa Doll. That version now beats the original version 100-0. We're not in the same ballpark anymore. The Chinese rightly call it a Go God. It's playing sublime moves. It's playing essentially perfect Go.
So against that backdrop, from one angle, you've got AI sort of bubbling away over the last half century, say from the 1950s. I mean, the classic instance that's referred to is the Dartmouth Conference. And now suddenly in our own time, it's morphed into this kind of, so some argue, an existential crisis. We've got people like Elon Musk, someone who presumably knows something about digital disruption, saying that it's an existential crisis. The late Stephen Hawking argued that AI might represent the end of humanity itself. How fearful do you think we should be?
Well, certainly the world faces an existential crisis, but it's not artificial intelligence. It's climate change, and it's what we're seeing happening today in the Ukraine and elsewhere. Those are existential crises to the planet. There is a distant threat, I think, that AI poses in terms of existential risk, the sort of thing that Nick Bostrom has talked about in terms of superintelligence and value alignment. That's a very small risk. I mean, I would compare that to the risk of the Large Hadron Collider. When they turned the Large Hadron Collider on, they did the calculations to work out what was the probability that a small black hole was going to be created in the Large Hadron Collider that would swallow the Earth. And there was a non-zero probability, and they worked out that was containable and a manageable risk. And so we do face such a risk. I mean, the real risks that AI pose are much more immediate. And I think not as existential. I mean, they're risks to the future of work, future inequality within our society, the disruption that we see to our political discourse that technologies are driving, slowly breaking down the fabric and the cohesion of our society through those disruptions to the way that our society works.
Can I press you a bit further on that? Because some of those worries and concerns and fears are still future orientated in terms of the here and now. One of the things that occurs to me is, in a sense, artificial intelligence is invisible. I mean, you don't actually sort of in your daily life clap eyes on a predictive algorithm. It's a bit like, God or globalization. It has its impacts. They're discerned, as it were, after the event. So again, what do you in our daily life think what issues are there to be most concerned about in terms of the operations and the technologies of AI?
Well, yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, one of the real challenges is, in some sense, it's a very invisible technology. People don't realize that the internet that you see is unique to you. You see an internet that only you see. It's specialized towards your preferences, to what the tech giants have learned about you from your browsing and your tweeting and your Facebooking. And that's completely different to the Facebook and the Twitter sphere and the Google search results that I see.
Right.
And the prices I see are different to the prices you see. And the tweets you see are different to the tweets I see. And so we used to live in a world in which we shared that content. We saw the same television programs at night. We read the same newspapers. And now, even if we read the same newspaper, the stories that we see are not necessarily the stories that you see, because we're reading them online and they're served up in a way that tries to attract us. And so those filter bubbles, we're already manipulating and changing how people think and polarizing our debate. And so that's not a future threat. That's something that we already see. We already see that effect. We've already seen it in Brexit, in the debate and referendum around Brexit. We've seen it in politics in the US and the elections that have happened in the US. We've seen very disturbing stories coming out of Myanmar and elsewhere about how Facebook is polarizing people and driving conflict and driving disruptive change that is not necessarily good for our social cohesion.
So at the political level, some have concluded that the age of AI may simply be coterminous with the rise of fake news. Would that be a wrong conclusion? And where are the benefits of AI in all of this?
Well, certainly it's hard not to conclude that AI has contributed and provided a lot of fake news and a lot of filtering that has promoted that fake news. And I think that is having very, very disruptive and very destructive impacts upon our society. And it's not just the fake news. I mean, it's also the filtering and the micro-targeting that is also associated with that. I mean, that's the content that is perhaps attracting people to click on it, but equally it's the way that our attention is being stolen by these algorithms, and not necessarily in a positive way. I honestly don't understand why Facebook does not do the right thing and say, let's just get out of political advertising. Every time they defend the misuse of political advertising on Facebook as a channel, they say, but we don't make a lot of money out of it. Okay, so you don't make a lot of money out of it. It's clearly not working very well. Why don't you do what Twitter's announced, which is just get out of that game? It's clearly really difficult to get algorithms to do this in a constructive way. You're going to make plenty of money selling people commercial goods. Why continue to make money by selling political content? It used to be, you would get people's attention by having good ideas and by saying something interesting. But now it's really easy to get people's attention by micro-targeting, and for a few cents you can buy people's attention.
COVID-19 impacted international research at universities and significantly. What's your view of how the global pandemic might have affected research in artificial intelligence?
Well, there's certainly a lot of people started to try and see if they could use AI to help deal with the challenge that COVID-19
the
posed.
search for vaccines and
through the whole life cycle. I mean,
Right.
first of all, search for vaccines, search for better therapies, through to more behavioural aspects of it in terms of social aspects of trying to encourage people and understand the spread of the disease. So there's been some positive uses, and I think that reflects a broader trend with artificial intelligence, which is to deal with the fundamental dual use nature of the technology. It's a technology that has many positive uses, but equally many negative uses. The same technologies can be used to surveil people and oppress them as can be used to take the drudgery away from people's lives. And so there's this burgeoning area of artificial intelligence research, which is AI for good, AI for social good, looking at the 17 UN SDGs. And so that very much fitted into that in terms of we could actually use artificial intelligence for positive ends. I think it was also just a broader moment where we realized that there are many challenges facing us. I mean, this is only one of them, and hopefully we'll get through the pandemic and we'll get on top of it. But we'll be still left with the climate emergency. We'll be still left with increasing inequality. We'll be still left with the fractured political debates that's happening in many of our countries. And I think there's one of the positives out of all the many negatives of the last 2 years was a realization that we can get to decide a different future. I mean, it was interesting to see that we introduced in many countries a form of universal basic income. Many people have said, "Oh, we can't possibly afford that, and that would be socially disruptive," and so on. But we paid people to stay at home, and for good reason, to protect the people, especially people who are immunocompromised and people with health issues. We realized that was the right thing to do, and that we could afford to do that. Things that were, not considered before in the past possible, we considered. And so I think that's, we should try and remember that as we come out of the pandemic, which is that there are different futures, and we can take care of the weaker members of society if we choose. I mean, it's all, the future is, technology is not destiny. The future is something that we get to decide by making good choices. And that's I think that needs to be a broad debate. It's not a debate that just technologists like myself need to be pushing. It's a debate that people like yourself, it's going to touch all of society, and all of society needs to think about, okay, well, we've got these interesting technologies that can take away some of the drudgery in our lives, that can create potentially immense wealth. How are we going to use these in positive ways to improve the quality of people's lives and to spread that wealth around?
Yeah. I want to come to your work as a scientist, as a researcher, as a writer, and as a thinker. Some years ago, the Australian dubbed you a rock star of AI. How did that impact on what you were doing?
Well, it just meant my family, my daughter especially, laughed at me even more because I don't feel like I don't own a leather jacket, so I'm clearly not a rock star in that sense. And I'm sure that's going to follow me to the grave. I'm going to have that written on my tombstone now. But once someone like the Australian names you that, it's something that will haunt you forever.
Yeah. But did it give you a different kind of platform to work with?
Yeah, I think it did, and I think it's really important that we have a very transformative technology. I mean, people have compared it to electricity, and it's hard to imagine our lives without electricity. Yeah. And I imagine in 20 or 30 years' time, it's going to be hard to imagine our life with, on top of that electricity, there's going to be lots of smartness, lots of artificial intelligence that's doing useful things for us. And that's an interesting and important debate. And so I feel a real responsibility as someone who has some seniority in the field to inform that debate, to make sure that politicians understand the opportunities and the risks, to inform the public, to make sure that they understand the opportunities and the risks. Because at the end of the day, if it's going to touch people's lives, it's really important that it touches, everyone is involved in making the right choices. And we already have seen, I think, we've made a few poor choices. We've given perhaps the tech companies a little too much freedoms that we're going to need, as we did with the Industrial Revolution. We are going to make some pretty major structural changes to our society to deal with the opportunities and the risks that this technology poses. I think we should remember from history, with the Industrial Revolution, we prospered greatly. Here in Australia, as in most developed countries, life expectancy has nearly doubled since the Industrial Revolution. So the quality of our lives, median income has increased significantly, although it has stalled of late. But we live, compared to people 200 or 300 years ago, we live like kings and queens. We have machines at our disposal that do the washing up and wash our clothes, and many of the diseases have disappeared. People live, as a consequence, much longer, much healthier, and hopefully much happier lives. But that happened in part because of the benefits that technology, the wealth that they generated, but also because we made some significant changes to our society to profit from that technology. We introduced unions to give people a collective bargaining rights against, so that Marx and people were wrong, that the owners of the machines didn't get all the wealth. We introduced labor laws to make sure that children weren't sent down the pit. We introduced universal education in many countries to make sure that people were educated so that they could have these well-paid jobs. We introduced universal healthcare in many places so that people could afford to have healthier lives. We introduced a pension and welfare system so that when you were out of work, you weren't in the poorhouse, and that when you finished working and you retired, you actually had something to look forward to. So we made some really significant changes to society to deal with the technological disruption. And I think it's reasonable to expect that we may have to make significant, equally profound changes to our society again to deal with the fact that we've got another technology that is going to change the nature of work and is going to change the distribution of wealth. And that's not something that's, if we do nothing, then I think the outcome is for most of us actually going to be, unfortunately, somewhat negative. That we will see a concentration of wealth. We will see the very rich get even richer, and the rest of us will be left behind. And again, if we look back at history, if we remember in the Industrial Revolution, the first 40 or 50 years of the Industrial Revolution were a net negative. Most people's lives went backwards. The quality of people's lives didn't pick up until after the Great Depression, until after the two world wars. And then after the Second World War, we introduced some reforms. We introduced welfare state in many places. There was a significant moment of redistribution of wealth, where we all got to profit from the benefits that the industrialization had brought.
So what's a day in the life of Toby Walsh? Do you spend a lot of time talking to Siri?
Well, funnily enough, I don't actually have Siri at home. I'm worried about having people listening in and so on, and I think that that's not a bargain I'm willing to make. I think what's interesting is I still spend a big chunk of my time doing research, trying to push the technology, but I spend a lot of my time trying to communicate, talk to people like yourself, talk to politicians, talk to the media, try and explain the technology, because I think it's really important that people understand. And unfortunately, a lot of people's ideas are driven by Hollywood. And that's a much more fantasy idea of what the technology is. That we're not going to have humanoid robots that are going to be our butlers and our soldiers anytime soon. It's going to arrive in our lives in much more invisible ways, as you were pointing out.
Right. I'd like to finish up on the theme of futures. The future of AI has often been discussed either in, on the one hand, utopian terms or, on the other hand, very dystopian terms. But it seems in recent times there's a more complex, nuanced debate emerging, particularly not so much the future of AI as its possible futures. And I just wondered if you could give us a glimpse into your thinking about that trajectory, where what road you think we're likely, if we look out to 2050 or 2070 and beyond.
Well, I do think we're going through a very difficult time. We face a tsunami of problems, some of which AI is creating and some of which AI will help us deal with. I mean, the climate change, increasing inequality, fractured political debate, and also, what's happening in geopolitics as we see today. We see a restructuring of global orders. And that's a very dangerous, very delicate moment, and it's hard to know how the cards are going to fall as we come out of that. People often ask me whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic, and I say, well, funny enough, I'm optimistic in the long term, but I'm pessimistic in the short term. That if we are going to deal with all these wicked problems, we have to embrace technologies, and that's what we've done in the past. That's how we've improved the quality of our lives. That's why we live much better quality lives than our grandparents. And if our grandchildren are going to have any hope with all of these really wicked problems, we have to embrace technology. We had a moment to deal with the climate, for example. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we could have dealt with the climate emergency by making a few political choices. That's no longer the case. We now have to accept 1.5 to possibly even more degrees temperature rise, and we're going to have to use technology to deal with that. So we're going to have to embrace technology to deal with some of these crises.
But to push you on that, just with the future of AI and climate change, there are those that argue that AI can actually undergird the development of, degrowth, a kind of push towards a low carbon or a post-carbon future. Others just say, no, look, that's pie in the sky. You've got a current situation of, global computing power. It's estimated out to 2025 might be eating up something like 20% of worldwide electricity supply. So again,
there's a lot of misunderstanding in this debate.
Right.
So if you look at the data, and unfortunately it's very difficult to know because the tech companies again are not very transparent about what they're doing. But if you look at data centers have got bigger and more numerous, but they've become more efficient. And the amount of energy being used by data centers, the amount of CO2 being produced by data centers, has probably not increased at all in the last 5 years. That even though that we're using more data and more compute, it's mostly now with renewable, and they've made data centers more efficient. So actually the carbon footprint of compute is not probably increasing. There was a somewhat flawed study that has made some of these predictions and just naively extrapolated, well, if data increases and compute doesn't get more efficient, then sure, it's going to start consuming. But all of computing is just a couple of percent of world energy. And AI is just a fraction of that. It's 0.1% maybe of world energy, and it's probably not going to go up. Indeed, for a variety of reasons, AI is going to move more out to the edge, away from the cloud, for a variety of reasons. One is for privacy reasons. Another is for response time. That more and more of our devices are going to actually run the AI. It's not going to be Google's cloud. That's going to be good in terms of your privacy, because as soon as the data leaves your ownership and is back up in the cloud, then who knows who's got it. So more and more devices are going to do more and more of the compute and more of the AI, which is going to be great from an energy perspective, because they're going to have to be more and more efficient. So there's a very significant part of AI research which is trying to do AI on smaller and smaller devices with less and less energy. So I'm actually optimistic that we're perhaps it's going to get a lot better, so that the concerns that people have are largely going to be dealt with as we push AI, make AI run on smaller and smaller devices at the edge, which is going to protect people's privacy. So there's going to be a lot of benefits from that. And indeed, There are going to be lots of savings that AI brings in terms of lots of journeys that we don't have to do, lots of things where the AI runs our building more efficiently, runs the air conditioning more efficiently, runs our devices more efficiently, that it's going to be a significant net positive.
Toby, finally, you've got this new book coming out, Machines Behaving Badly, which sounds somewhat wicked in itself. Can you tell us just a little about that?
Yes, it's coming out in May. It's looking at the ethical challenges that AI poses. And the thesis is largely that this isn't the first technology to touch our lives. We've had many technologies that have touched our lives. And so most of the ethical challenges aren't new ones, although AI may put them on steroids. It may change the speed, the scale, or the cost that we can do things, and that has consequences. But in terms of the ethical questions we need to be asking, almost all of them are the same. As they're about fairness and justice and equity, the sorts of things that we've always asked about technologies. And so there's nothing, but with one exception, there is one new thing that AI brings, one unique characteristic of this technology that we've never had before, which is autonomy, the fact that we're giving machines the ability to make decisions largely independent of us. And that is a first. That's something that we've never had before. We've never had machines that could go off and make decisions which might have life or death consequences. And that's probably why the two areas that we've seen the most interesting, most novel ethical debate is around autonomous cars, where trolley problems and cars might accidentally kill people, have to make life or death decisions, and autonomous weapons. A debate that I've been very active in about, again, where we're explicitly designing machines to take human lives, and the challenges, the ethical, moral, legal challenges that pose.
Toby Walsh, thank you so very much for all the great work that you do on so many different fronts, and thank you for joining us on Monnet Conversations.
It's been my pleasure.